Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I am Jamie Clark. This is the Saturday show live, coming from Perth in Western Australia. Happy lunchtime to everyone else. It's evening time here at 8 o'clock in the evening. We've got a great show today. We've actually got another Aussie guest on, actually, called Peter Sherwin, who's joining us from Melbourne in Victoria. Peter is a maths teacher and he works at Geelong Grammar School. So he's got lots to share in terms of no pain, no gain and creating the desirably difficult classroom. So I'm incredibly excited to speak to Peter today about his journey in education and basically what he's learned from the research, which is super, super interesting. Before we get into it, though, I just want to remind you that the show is on every Saturday. Every other Saturday, from 1 p.m. until 2 p.m. and that's UK time. So obviously you're going to have to work that out regardless of where you are around the globe. But if you are tuning in, it is every other Saturday. And please come live because we have the opportunity to participate and ask questions and you can join in with the conversation. If you are actually watching this as a recording, then welcome. And hopefully you find this show especially helpful for your own practice. Before we dig into the guest and talk to Peter, though, I just want to mention a couple of sponsors for the show, which are incredibly powerful for my own practice. Firstly and foremost, we've got John Catt Education. John Catt, if you don't know who they are the inspirational publishers of some excellent professional development books for teachers, and they supported me in my own practice. I've got a bookshelf full of John Catt books, including my own book, by the way, which is Teaching One Pages. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can visit the John Catt Bookshop at johncattbookshop.com. and also explore their range of titles. I've got lots to offer, including the Desirable Difficulties book in Action book, which actually came out a few months ago, which relates to this particular episode. So if you want to check them out, you can use the code JCTTR2425, and you can actually get 20% off your order at John Catt. We're actually sponsored by Teaching How-Tos as well. So Teaching How-Tos, I guess imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. You can with this platform. It's a highly personalizable platform. It's a social platform that inspires busy teachers to apply and learn evidence-based techniques. And it's basically got a new AI tool as well, which is super interesting. So please check it out. The good thing about it, it has over 160 visual guides for teachers, which is always really powerful, especially for the things that I tend to use for professional development. The more visual, the better. So if you're interested in finding out more about Teaching How-Tos, then go to their website at teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Reading Solutions UK, if you're looking for the best practice and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong readers, then please check out Reading Solutions UK. They've recently had a conference, and basically leaders in education, literacy experts, ed tech specialists from the International Reading Conference were there. It was a 3-day experience. And basically what you can do by going to their website is sign up and receive the recordings for free. Their website is readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. And if you sign up, you'll find those recordings are really helpful. Finally, we have Apps for Good. Apps for Good also sponsor our show on Teachers Talk Radio. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory courses for computing. The computer courses are basically for everyone. They include elements from the UK curriculums as well, and they're fully resourced and mapped out. So students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. If that sounds something interesting to you, check it out at www.appsforgood.org. Okay, that's our sponsors for the show. Without further ado, I'd just like to mention our guest today. His name is Peter Sherwin. He is from Melbourne, as I said before, and I was first introduced to Peter at Research Ed last year in Perth when we held it there. And I was fascinated by Peter's actual presentation, because he did present on Robert Bjork's Desirable Difficulties, and he spoke about his personal journey as well. And I think when anyone ever mentions their own experiences and personal reflections and how they've changed their practice, it really is powerful, and it's a great thing to listen to, and how it's grown and how he's taken hold of these evidence-based practices. So Peter spoke to me and to the group about designing a classroom that embraces challenge, that embraces discomfort and healthy struggle, and that's what Peter's going to talk to us today about. So I'd like to welcome Peter onto the show. Peter, how are you going?
Jamie, yeah, well, thank you very much. You say it's sort of 8 o'clock your way. It's it's gone 10 p.m. over here, so end of a long Saturday, but really pumped for the discussion, and it's an honour to be on your show. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, you're welcome. You're welcome to be on. And by the way, everyone, if you want to ask Peter a question today, then you can do. This is an interactive show, and we're going to pop up any questions you have for Peter along the way. So first and foremost, Peter, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you, I guess, to focus on the science of learning?
Yeah, Jamie, my background is, as you mentioned, in teaching mathematics, and I've taught at 3 large schools in 2 states in Australia, but I also had a stint in the UK and taught over at Bedford School for 8 years or so. Part of that journey, being in the independent system, I've had an opportunity to run cricket programs and boarding programs, running a boarding house at Geelong and also back at Bedford. So I've benefited from the rich experience that teaching is in any school, and I suppose along that journey, maths teaching has been the constant in all that, and I've always loved teaching, but I haven't taught with evidence in the background for more than probably 9 or 10 years now. And so I really taught on sort of intuition and high engagement and all that sort of stuff. Relationships, forming relationships was, we were told, the most important thing to get sorted first up. And so that was how I taught. I enjoyed it. I was getting success. Students seemed to enjoy my classes, that sort of thing. But I think it was like I said, about 10 years ago, and I came across, and I think it might have been via discussion on Twitter, I came across the work of Kirshner, Sweller, and Clark in their 2006 paper, Minimal Guidance, or Why Minimal Guidance During Instruction Does Not Work. And I think that really affected a lot of people in the education industry, in the teaching game, because it really did question everything, really. It talked about the cognitive architecture that we have sitting in front of us in our classrooms, cognitive load theory. Really, what really grabbed me was this idea of biologically primary versus biologically secondary knowledge. I hadn't thought about this stuff before, Jamie, and so I'd been I'd been immersed in discovery learning and inquiry learning and problem-based learning. And all this, and we were, as a profession, we were encouraged to go down this path.
Could I just stop in there, Peter? Just
yeah, please do.
About that, because, well, obviously, like, we work in Australia. We've had experience in schools. I have for the last 8-9 years. One thing I've recognised about Aussie schools is, I guess, the focus on inquiry in a lot of schools and a lot of discovery-based processes and whatnot. Do you think it's still something that should be harnessed by schools and utilised by schools? Because I think the argument is either you one or the other. Is it possible to have a balance between like discovery learning and explicit instruction? Because you did mention the paper there by Sweller, Kirshner, and who else was it? Clark as well.
Clark, yeah.
Do you think there's a balance that could be had?
Yeah, I think there is. I don't think it helps to have the parties at opposite ends of a spectrum, because I think it is a spectrum. I certainly think that inquiry learning has its place, but I think the important thing that I've come to understand is that that comes after. So we've got some knowledge base. So I think it's an incredibly frustrating and difficult process learning new material. I think what I've picked up is that novice learners need to be taught, and once they have a base and they have some expertise, then we can introduce some inquiry learning. And so I think it's really about the order in which we introduce these teaching methods rather than one versus the other, or one is better than the other.
Would you say that that's the power of the science of learning, cognitive science, is getting teachers to recognize that should come first? Because often I found that teachers jump straight to the inquiry.
I think you're right, Jamie. I think absolutely right. We need to recognize the order in which our students, the order in which they learn. So what they need at what stage of their learning journey. And it's not that they're both valid methods by which we can teach our children, but it's what they need early in their journey is explicit teaching. Once they've formed some knowledge, and in secondary schooling and primary schooling, explicit teaching has to dominate. It's not to say by the time they're reaching the end of that schooling that there are going to be some opportunities for some inquiry learning and some less. We can remove some of the scaffold.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about before Tom Sherrington's Mode A and Mode B approaches. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but Tom mentions, the Mode A being the knowledge building, the explicit instruction teaching, the modeling, scaffolding, and whatnot. And then what follows, I guess, is that he breaks it up as 60% and 40%. So 40% then being Mode B, which is more discovery, hands-on experiences and whatnot. But I think you're right. It needs to come first and precede the discovery part of the learning journey. Okay, so you've mentioned a bit about explicit instruction. I actually shared something on that a few weeks ago, a one-pager on Kirshner's paper with Clark and Sweller, and it is quite a controversial one because some teachers dismiss it instantly, and the ones who are a little bit more well-versed in research perhaps are the ones who endorse it and promote it. But yeah, I do agree. I don't think it should be one or the other. I think it should be a bit of a balance. So let's move on to think about desirable difficulties. Then this is the main focus, should say, of your presentation back last year, and you titled it "Creating the Desirably Difficult Classroom," which I really loved, and I loved your reflection on how you took your journey and transformed your teaching over the last 10 years or so. But do you want to talk a little bit about Bjork's research in his paper from 1994? What were the key findings for this then? Or I guess what's the overall, what's something that we need to know about it?
Yeah, Jamie, I think, and thanks for coming to my presentation, by the way. It was an honor to have you in the audience. And it was a talk I wanted to give because I'd taken a great interest in this idea of desirable difficulties, aspects of our teaching that don't come intuitively but are really important. But I also wanted to build into that this idea that they're learning. Bjork's work was on learning focused difficulties, but as teachers we also have intuitive methods that we've perhaps used through our careers, but they're not always the best one for our students. So I wanted to write a presentation about a desirably difficult classroom that we as teachers can create that will help our learners learn in a longer term way, rather than just for the next test or for the next stage. But also how, as teachers, we can start to build some habits around our classroom that are also not intuitive, that we have to really be purposeful about, but they're going to deliver some really great results for our students. So that was the idea behind the talk, and I suppose it's important up front to define desirable difficulties, and I think that's most easily done perhaps by saying that desirable difficulties will promote long-term memory over short-term performance. So it's promoting learning, which is, if we take the Sherrington's definition of learning as being a change in long-term memory, then we're championing that over short-term performance, and the short-term performance is the easier thing to obtain. So that's where the difficulty lies. And importantly, also concentrating or putting all our eggs in the performance basket is going to have a detrimental effect on the potential for long-term learning. And if we think about it, that's got to be our goal as teachers, is for them not to know it just tomorrow and next week, although they do need to know it tomorrow and next week in order for them to know it next month and next year. However, if our focus is on them knowing it tomorrow and not looking any further ahead, then we are going to be teaching in a different way, and it's not going to be as durable for our students. So that's a long-winded answer to your question about setting up desirable difficulties. That's learning over performance. I suppose that distinction is the most important thing to understand before you can get into the discussion about desirable difficulties.
When you first engaged with this paper and this research, was it something you did as a whole school, or was it something you decided to do like personally? I was just a bit interested in like how you got onto the research in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not I can't remember actually, Jamie, what took me to it. I think it was just as I said, about 9 or 10 years ago, I found this great community of educators on Twitter, and it will have been I'm sure a paper that would have been shared on that platform, and it just grabbed my imagination. This idea, and also this horrible thought that I've been already teaching for 15, 16 years. And in my words, and I use this language in the presentation, I've been teaching easy. I've been loving my job and really putting lots into it, but just doing what felt right. And I hadn't engaged with any of the research. And that's an ignorance that it was shared among our profession, I feel. And I feel like we're making some ground now, and it's a very exciting time to be in teaching. And I think the UK are ahead of us, but we're catching up. And but I think we are. But I don't. But where did I first come across it? I just think it was one of those things that was being discussed. This work, this 1994 paper, that probably at the time didn't. I think it's really taken off more recently, Jamie. Back in '94, I'm not sure there was the insight there, or there was the appetite among the teaching community for these ideas to be shared. But it's certainly there now.
I know that ResearchEd and other kind of organizations and conferences and whatnot have really brought the idea of, the science of learning to the fore, haven't they? And the kind of concept of long-term memory and working memory. And I think this really plays into that. And it's a super good approach to consider when, defining what your lesson plan looks like. It's about the healthy struggle and not necessarily, like you said, keeping your practice easy and just kind of cruising, but not thinking about what the students are thinking, because you want them to think hard, essentially. So you alluded to that in your kind of, when you mentioned learning versus performance. Do you want to give us a bit more of an understanding of and concrete examples of what you mean by learning and what you mean by the performance element?
Yes, Jamie. Okay, so learning is a change in long-term memory, which is stable, durable, but it's much harder to achieve than performance, which is just an observable success on a task immediately after it's been taken. So I think I think for me that answered a lot of questions, and obvious when you reflect on it, but when we teach for performance, we are really just teaching for short-term gains, which means we will be blocking and cramming and doing the easy things. And the students certainly won't know any better and won't argue with it, because it's nice for them to learn in this way, and they will experience success. But the problem is, a month later, they've forgotten it. And that's the student lament of I knew this, but my exam score is disappointing. And this was a recurring theme. So the difference between learning and performance is that, and what it does for us as teachers is we have to make a decision. Do we want our students to perform, or do we want them to learn? And I make the point in my talk that performance, we're not wishing failure on our students in the short term. We still want them to do well tomorrow and next week. However, where the focus is not on that, it's on the longer term learning, which means that we're going to be interleaving. We'll talk about a few of these these techniques of desirable difficulties, I'm sure, as we go through. But it means that we'll take those easy options, and our students will be less well prepared in a month's time to address the content of today. And so it's obvious when you think about it, but having an understanding of that difference is essential. And I think if for me, it was making a commitment then to teaching for learning rather than for performance.
Yeah, and I think performance can be deceiving, can't it? Because it makes it seem like students are actually learning and progressing really well, but actually, that it's not sticking long term, because it's I guess it's unstable, and it can be quite misleading, can't it? Would you agree with that?
I think that's one of the most deceptive things, Jamie, is that we get a misassessment. We can misassess good performance as learning, and I think that is what we see in students when down the track they find that they're not being successful because they don't know things beyond the short term. And that's right. So that we can move forward blissfully unaware that we haven't embedded what we need to embed.
And we think we're doing the right thing. We think we're doing the right thing, don't we?
Yep. We sure do.
Peter, in your presentation, you put this diagram up, and it was about ratios. I'm going to pop it up now. I think it's quite useful for you guys at home to see this, because it illustrates a lot about students thinking hard versus few students thinking hard. And I just wanted, Peter, if you don't mind, to explain this and why you presented it and what your main point was for this particular diagram.
Okay, so thanks for putting this up, Jamie. You've got a few of my annotations on there. I think that diagram perhaps comes from Teaching Like a Champion. Might have come from Lemov's book, I think. But I like it. It's in talking about this idea of ratio, which is also from that manual. The sweet spot top right, as we look at it, where the target, the goal of 100% participation, 100% of students thinking hard about what we want them to think about. So that's top right, but the arrow that's sliding down to the left is the default, and that's what we're fighting as teachers. And this in a diagram perhaps encapsulates the desirable difficulty of teaching, but the ultimate goal of attaining long-term learning for our students. So getting into that top right means that we're having lots of students thinking, ideally, and I like to talk about having 100% of the class, because why would we aspire to anything less? And then having them also thinking hard, because we can get a lot of our students thinking about very easy things and they're not going to make terrific growth. So it's also having them think hard. So getting full engagement, getting them thinking very hard about what it is that we need them to be thinking about. But gravity is against us, and the default is to fall, because learning is difficult. What we're asking our students to do is difficult and painful and energy sapping, and so their default will be to switch off, to look out the window, to engage in conversation, to do all those things that are much more enjoyable and less stressful. So that's the idea behind that diagram, and that, as I say, encapsulates our challenge as teachers.
Yeah, I think we'll return back to that a bit later on when we talk about ratio again. But I just wanted
Yep.
to drop that in there because it was part of your presentation. I thought, oh, I'd love for you to explain that. But we'll move on to, like, I guess, the main desirable difficulties that you have introduced into your own practice. I think you picked out 3, didn't you? The 3 kind of main manipulations, they refer to them as, being, like distributed practice, interleaving, retrieval practice, and whatnot. Should we start with the first one? Should we talk about distributed practice? And because you emphasised that the value of it over cramming is really important in terms of getting students to think hard, like we just saw on that diagram there, because it helps long-term retention. So do you want to explain how you incorporate distributed practice and how it's worked out in your own classroom?
Yeah, Jamie, and there, you're right. I did talk about 3, and they're probably the 3 that get focused on most. Bjork did, the Bjorks came up with 5 of these manipulations, they call them, desirable difficulties. Distributed practice, that the idea of spacing out a unit of study, as opposed, it's often most easily understood by looking at the opposite, which is cramming in this case. So the most important thing about distributed practice or spacing is that it introduces some forgetting, some strategic forgetting, and that's the difficulty here, in that by introducing some forgetting, that the effort required to recall that knowledge, that content, that's the difficulty, but that's also what enables our knowledge to get into our long-term memory.
So that sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? When you say,
Yeah.
when you want students to forget, what would you say to a teacher who said to you, like, "That's Peter, that sounds stupid. That's ridiculous. Why would we want our students to forget knowledge?"
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's the great paradox, I suppose, of the learning process. But I think what I'd say is that if the alternative is that we learn in a block, and without any chance or without any opportunity of forgetting and retrieving, and then move on to another block. Without that opportunity to forget, retrieve, we're not allowing our memories, our knowledge to work its way into long term, and then for us to retrieve from long term. And so I think that process of going from working memory into long term, retrieving from long term, putting back into long term in a modified way, that is how this knowledge is going to stick. Versus working with it in our working memory in the short term, and then leaving it alone, moving on to another block where we haven't got that interplay. And I think that interplay between that retrieval and retrieval from long term back into working memory, that's where the magic happens. And I suppose that's how we need to share that understanding of distributed practice, Jamie.
Could you quickly explain how you might do that in a maths curriculum and a maths scheme of work, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. So I think that's probably best done through testing. So every course that I teach would be a sort of midterm, term test, will be a cumulative test on the work that's been covered for the whole year. And indeed, so if we run our assessment program in that way, what we're doing is we're forcing our students to go back and revisit parts of the course that have been taught previously. So in a block of work, what we'll be doing is learning some material, then moving into some other area, and then we'll be coming back to that material to relearn it in order to revise for a test. And in that way, what we end up with is a cycle of learning throughout the course of the year, but really it's anchored in assessment. So assessment is so important in this way. If we treat assessment in that blocked way, then the students are not going to get that opportunity to go and revisit that work. And so the assessment is critical to that idea of distributing our practice over the course of a term or a semester or a whole year.
Would you say that's a challenging thing to implement? Would you say it's been a challenge for your teachers at your school?
I think the challenging thing is to implement it, and it's breaking habits, I suppose. And it's difficult to sell it to students, although I find with all of these things we're talking about, Jamie, that students will jump on board with it when they have it explained to them. But I think implementation is difficult because, again, it's something it's a difficulty. So of course a student, or of course a class of students are going to prefer to have a test on the last 3 weeks of work rather than on the last 8 weeks of work. That's obvious. It's for 8 weeks of work. There's that difficulty of going, but that's precisely why we're going to test you on that on 8 weeks of work rather than 3, because the difficulty for you to retrieve that work is how it's going to end up with you in the long term. So yes, it's a tough sell. However, once it's embedded, and I also think that what we notice quite quickly are that the benefits to learning become most obvious in this way. So once we've run a cycle through, then we have it embedded in our system, and I think we're good to go, Jamie.
You're definitely seeing some improved student outcomes, I guess, through this process. Is that right?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt, Jamie, that's right. And they see it as well. That frustration of taking a term or a semester test and having that knowledge that was there that's not there any longer. Removing that by having these methods of distributed practice, interleaving, etc. It's you've only got to run it through a cycle and see the success for it to be embraced.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. We'll move on to the second desirable difficulty that you've ran with and you presented on last year, and that's interleaving. Can you explain how you use interleaving in a similar way to distributed practice in your classroom? And guess what benefits have you seen from this?
Jamie, interleaving, or its enemy, I suppose, being blocking. So in my subject, it's been the traditional way of teaching to teach in very discrete blocks of work. So if we're learning, for instance, some trigonometry, and perhaps we're using right angle trigonometry, we're going to learn using the sine rule first, and we're going to see all our examples are going to do the sine rule, and we might take a day or two on that, and then we'll look at some different examples, and that might be the cosine rule. So we'll block in this way. So what interleaving does is within topics. So interleaving is not a mixed bag of work from this topic and that topic. We're not pulling from all areas of the course. It's important that we understand that interleaving is done within a topic, but within a topic, we are taking different information, and we're mixing, we're throwing it all into the mix, so that students are forced to notice the similarities and the differences between questions as they're doing it. If they know that the next 20 questions are going to be of a certain type, then they're not on the lookout now for similarities and differences. They will just switch into autopilot. So
this kind of Sorry to
Sorry,
interrupt
Jamie.
you.
Yep.
This kind of reminds me what you're saying of like a little bit from what Daniel Willingham says in Why Don't Students Like School. He says if you teach the underlying concepts, then students can see the links and the connections between different topics or topics within topics. So is that what you're alluding to there? The idea of kind of teaching the inherent structure of a topic or an idea?
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. And that's such an important element of this. Is that appreciation of those similarities and differences, I think, adds to their enjoyment or appreciation of the topic itself. I think when they see it in discrete clumps, it's harder to connect, and they find it more difficult perhaps to connect themselves to appreciate the work that they're doing. So I think that's incredibly valid. Yes. So with interleaving also, I think every question, because the students have to be on the lookout for what information I'm given, I can't switch off. It means that their memory is they're being reloaded constantly, and so they're by forcing them to think through the methods for each question, they're having to rehearse those steps, and that means that that learning takes place more quickly, and clearly down when it comes time for an assessment, they are going to need to distinguish between the different types of questions. And so doing this in the lead up, it makes them more capable of doing that when it gets to the test. Although, so here's an example of something like interleaving in the short term will feel more difficult, and they won't experience as much success in the day-to-day. And that's why it's a desirable difficulty, because if we were blocking their work, then it would be easier for them to just hit repeat on a method, and they would feel more successful more quickly. So what we're doing is we're slowing down that feeling of success. But in that process, they are learning, and they're being forced to think more carefully about each question. And I think, as you say, they're going to appreciate the unit of work more, because they'll see some of the underlying structures because they're on the lookout for them.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Peter. If you guys at home are wanting to ask any questions, please feel free to type it in, and we'll respond to any questions you have live. Obviously, if you're not watching this live, then you can't. But we are going to move on to desirable difficulty number 3, which I'm sure everyone has heard about. It's become definitely very popular in the last however many years, and that's retrieval practice. And I guess it's the similar question, Pete, really. What are the benefits of retrieval? How do you use it in class? How is it a practical tool to strengthen that kind of retention?
Yeah, so Bjork and Bjork talked about retrieval practice being it's to overcome its enemy, which was reading presentations or going over presentations. So retrieving rather than reading. And I guess the classic traditional study method of highlighting notes, or I say to my students, if it when you're preparing for exams, if it's easy, it's not effective. That's your rule of thumb. If it feels easy and comfortable, if you're looking forward to it, even it's not going to be effective. So retrieval practice is really about testing, and testing is confronting and challenging, and you're risking failure with every question. But that very act of having to think hard and dig deep and come up with the wrong answer and then look up the right answer, and this testing can take place either self-testing through flashcards or peer testing, but from a teacher's point of view, it's the regular low or no stakes quizzes Even just through in a classroom where you're perhaps getting the students to turn and talk. I use mini whiteboards all the time. So that's all testing, and that's all retrieval practice. And if you can build in some of that spacing into that retrieval practice, so you can throw in some of those questions that work covered a few weeks ago or a month ago. The idea is that we're concentrating on the output of the student rather than what they're taking in. And so that's a real, I guess, a summary of what these desirable difficulties are about. It's about a real focus, a desire to get the students giving output, practicing their verbal responses to questions, written responses to questions, and doing it in that way rather than the comfortable methods of reading, having this perception of competence, or this illusion of competence by doing something easy. Where this is what the desirable difficulty of retrieval practice is really attacking.
Yeah. And it's not about having a mandated quiz at the beginning of every lesson. It's kind of a strategic process, where you'd provide the right quiz or the right activity at the right time. How do you do it? Do you just kind of do it when you think the students need or require that that kind of practice, or how do you implement it in like a single lesson? Would you start off with a quiz, or how does it work?
Yeah, Jamie, I do have routines in my classroom, but as you say, I think retrieval practice, it will find its way into my do nows at the start of a lesson. It'll be there, but that's really just to kick things off. Yeah, it's a more edgy activity when it is a bit more fast paced, mini whiteboard, hands up, turn and talk. But at the right time, it's also a 15-minute written assessment with no stakes. I mean, the more of that happens, I think the students feel more ready to perform under test conditions. So it really is mixing it up, I think, Jamie, but also encouraging them to have the tools to test themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
So, having the slide deck of cue cards and encouraging them to use them to test themselves, but also to give them to their friends to test each other.
Yeah, I don't think students often know how to revise effectively, and I think it's good to teach these, especially retrieval practice strategies to them. I mean, in the book that I've written recently, one of the spreads is about low stakes recall, and I've mentioned the idea of hiding the broccoli in the brownies, which is from a quote from a learning scientist called Megan Sumeracki, which essentially means having a variety of retrieval strategies in your toolkit to keep things fresh, but also to deploy at the right time. And I think students need that toolkit as well.
Yeah, absolutely right, Jamie. And I think that's something as teachers that we haven't. I don't think we've known enough about it ourselves, but with this evidence base that we're now working from, I think we're much better equipped now to help our students understand how best to study and to embed knowledge in their long-term memory, which is where it's going to where they're going to want it, so that they can easily retrieve it when they need it. I think that's something that we can really improve on with these strategies. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Peter. We'll just take a break for 1 second. I just want to let everyone know again about our sponsors today, and enjoy this quick video. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How To's platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Are you looking for the best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The 3-day conference explores a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and all key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. Hello, we're back. Thanks, Peter, for your chat there about retrieval practice. We're just going to move on a little bit and talk about the challenges of implementing desirable difficulties in designing that classroom that is, it has and entails healthy struggle and challenge. What would you say, and I'm going to kind of move on to behavior really, what would you say is your point of view in terms of behavior and how that plays into creating that culture in the classroom?
Jamie, I think the problem with behavior is I think we've assumed too much when it comes to behavior standards, what we expect students or how they'll behave. And I think that's a mistake we've made as a profession. Perhaps I don't know if I can speak for all of my colleagues there, but I think by not laying out the expected behavior of our students, I think we've let the environment down, because I think our students, they want to see us construct and patrol strong and caring boundaries. I think they want to see that in every environment they go to, and what it does for us creating an environment where they can learn is it gives us a basis of order, upon a foundation of order upon which we can provide learning experiences for our students. So it's fair to say that without good behavior, we can't achieve much at all, can we, Jamie? So
absolutely,
that's absolutely key.
It's the foundation, isn't it? I mean, I guess that culture you're talking about and embedding space practice, embedding interleaving and retrieval, it's just not going to work, is it, unless you've got those foundations in place. And you mentioned a little bit in your presentation about slant as well. And slant's quite a controversial one. I don't know if to bring this up or not, but the technique slant is something that, do you use this technique in your classroom? And do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I do it. And I the kids, again, they like it. They like having they just want to know where they stand. And what I like about slant is it really the way I explain it is it's the ingredients of good listening, because I think we want our students to be good listeners, because without listening, that's the portal to understanding and knowledge. So we need to explain to them that listening is important, but they also, a bit like behavior, they don't really know how to listen well. So I think SLANT is a nice acronym to help them understand what it is that they need to do to listen well. So sitting up straight helps them listen. And I will sit in my class and I'll take a seat out the front, and I'll take a posture that I will be using when I'm at home watching a movie and I'm just in relax mode. And so
Yeah.
I'll sit back like this, and I'll say, well, this is how I'd sit at home if I was just relaxing. Now in here, I'm on my sofa. I don't need to be watching the footy or whatever. I don't need to be listening. But if I want to listen, let's all try it. Let's all sit up straight. Yeah, that actually works. Asking and answering questions in full sentences. That's our ALs. Obviously, you just listen. Nothing in hands. And it's another. I find that my students will understand when we model things like, I'll tell them to slouch, have something in their hand, scribble, look out the window, and I'll start talking. And then I'll tell them to sit up, to go hit slant, and I'll keep talking, and I'll get them to recognize how the listening is so much better when they're doing these things. So when they're not being patronized, it's not us being authoritative. It's just helping them understand how good listening works. T is track the speaker. Everyone we're all better listeners when we're paying attention to the person that is talking. So I have no problem with it, and my students have no problem with it. I like to use it. I think there's people get very, very reactive about some of these ideas, but really, I think when we're when we explain why we're using things, I think people feel respected and understand and find it helpful. I know my students do.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you talked about the pull and the kind of appealing, high energetic lessons that we're attracted to as teachers. And what you're saying here is that we need to keep students cognitively active, not just kind of swaying off track. But what else can we do to keep them cognitively active? Because we are kind of drawn to those high energy lessons and those performance related activities. There are some other things you did mention in your presentation.
Yeah, that's right, Jamie. And the pull, as you referred to it there, was the language I used. The pressure that's on us, and that diagram that was there before about trying to keep our students on thinking hard with great engagement. The pull for us and what we get drawn to as teachers is that we want to get sucked into this idea of teaching. Really, I think I think our idea of a good teacher is someone who gets through the content quickly. They teach high, fast, energetic lessons. They almost get in like a vacuum, a teaching flow, where questions are asked, and within a second, a hand has gone up. We've taken an answer. If it's wrong, we've bounced to the next one. Nothing's going to stop our flow. We are within 10 or 15 minutes. We've asked a bunch of questions. We've got answers. It's not necessarily representative of the group, but we haven't stopped to think too much about that. We've set them to some work. There's a little bit of chatter, but that's okay as well. The kids are happy. I'm getting through the content. There's a nice bit of banter in the room. This is the pull, and this is what pulled me along for 15 years of my career. So the resistance to the pull, which is those, I think I had 6 or 7 in my talk, and we've already talked about a couple of them. And that is getting behavior straight. That is getting having some language in your classroom like slant that reminds everyone how we're going to listen best. There was a ratio is another one, and that's the getting that high ratio of thought and engagement. But that happens through good checks for listening and understanding, through cold calling. Students need to be ready to answer every question you ask, and they need to be thinking, I could be asked this next question. You don't want them relaxing. You don't want them thinking, I've learned, I know the system here. I know how the teacher works. He's only or she's only going to take hands that go up, so my hand stays down. Or they're very good at and there's that drag down that we were talking about before, that the default is to disengage, because that's the easiest thing to do, and that's not a criticism. And we talk about our students we're all the same. So developing some norms in your class where students they're ready to answer every question, and so having a coral response, constant checks for understanding, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Thinking is allowing thinking time, Jamie, is another really important one. We can't have calling out in class. I call that the thought killer. That's if not the greatest crime in the classroom, it's close to it. And it's pantomime style. If someone calls out, I get very dramatic and play up in a big way, because I want. And the students, they're very quick to sort of put their hands up and apologise for that, because they know how thinking is our thinking time in class is our most precious resource. So
how do you do it? How do you do the thinking time? What's your process?
So it's hard, because the students' hands have gone up. They want you to they want this lesson accelerated through. So firstly it's not doing anything for 3 seconds, which is hard. 3 seconds is quite a long time, when I think the average response time is a second and a half. So firstly, counting in your head, tapping your thigh 3 times. I sometimes do that. Insisting on no calling out. But even then, after 3 seconds, it's and I've got in my class, it's all hands up. That's the default. If I've only got a third of hands up, I'll be scanning in quite a demonstrative way, saying, "Where I should have some more hands here. I'm sure there's some more." And so I'm trying to pull some more hands up. If I've still only a third to a half, I might say, right, hands down, turn and talk. I'll give them 20 seconds to do that. It's getting them to think is, I think, our greatest challenge, but it's also our most important task. So they're just some of the things I use.
No, that's awesome. And what you're actually speaking to me, Peter, is the idea of developing a culture, like a culture of hard thinking, of learning, and embedding lots of routines which become the norm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is so powerful. And Peps McRae talks a lot about norms and establishing norms, and I love what he's said about, and that's really influenced a lot of my thinking about setting up the room, because it's so powerful. Things like calling out in another room, it might be okay to do that, but they know in my classroom that they're ready to be condemned for calling out. So things like that. Kids buying into these norms and routines, because they can see the value in them. They feel respected. You want me to think. I think if you're in a class where the teacher's never asking you a question, yes, it might be easy, but I don't think you feel great about those classrooms. So I think you're right, Jamie. It's about building up a really vibrant classroom where expectations are high. Involvement is expected, thoughts are valued, and keeping that consistent. So every day it's the same, and you get that buy-in and that enjoyment.
Would you say that your students are motivated from feeling that success?
Yes, absolutely, and getting that success, Jamie. I'm so glad you said that. That's critical. And I think that's the next thing after. You've got to have every student walking out of your class feeling successful every single lesson, and that can be absolutely done at whatever level the class is at. But that is going to lead to their motivation, and that's something that is the biggest lesson I've learned in 30 years of teaching, possibly. The success leads to motivation rather than me thinking I motivate these kids and that'll help them be successful. Absolutely. I think it's stronger the other way around.
Well, that's the misconception, isn't it? That we motivate students to be successful, but actually success breeds motivation. And I love the kind of going from the point of view of building this culture of high expectations, of high participation, of challenging work as well, and hard thinking. So finally, Peter, before we break off and leave, do you want to explain to our viewers who are watching this or listening to this what advice you give them in terms of creating this culture or developing a desirably difficult classroom?
Yeah, well, there's two different questions in that, but I think what you can do is you build this idea of a desirably difficult classroom, and what we've talked about tonight. A lot of it is in building routines and difficult but good difficult methods of questioning, of expectations, of lesson delivery. But what I would say is that I would encourage your listeners to read up on desirable difficulties. Read the original paper. Read your one pages, Jamie. There's you mentioned the desirable difficulty. What is it? The inaction series. There's a great book there. Reading up, I think, and getting a good understanding of what these desirable difficulties are, committing to the principle of teaching's not easy, learning's not easy. There is a natural tendency to pull from that. So what we've got to do is fight that as teachers, and that's our primary responsibility. But I would say try one learning and one resistance technique, and perhaps the one that you think might give you highest potential leverage for a boost in your classroom.
Fantastic. Excellent advice, Peter. I just want to thank you for coming on. I know it's late for you in Melbourne. What is it, 11 now? 11 o'clock?
Yeah, we've gone 11, Jamie. Yeah, definitely bedtime for me.
It's bedtime, yeah, and for me as well. Yeah, I want to thank you, and I hope I get to run into you at some other conference in Australia. And Diana Wilson said, "Brilliant, Peter. Thanks for sharing these workable strategies." I put that up before. So this is definitely well received. We've currently got 600 viewers watching live now. So thank you for tuning in.
Brilliant.
I'm sure that your ideas, your perspectives have resonated really well, with all educators. So yeah, thank you, Peter, and we'll catch up again at some point.
Cheers, Jamie. Enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Right, thank you, everybody. If you enjoyed this show, please retweet the live stream. And please share it in your networks and whatnot. Super pleased to be presenting today. I just want to remind you that we have the show coming up in 2 weeks again. The Saturday show, and it's live at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. In 2 weeks' time. So I'll announce the guest for next time. Hopefully you will tune in and share this show far and wide. But thanks again, and I'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.